Welcome to the July 27, 2023 meeting of Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. A link has been provided on the Commission's website for the public to review this meeting. Before we begin, do any commissioners have any opening comments? There being none, Hayden, please take roll call. Commissioners?
Commissioner Carter.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Woodson.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions or comments from the commissioners before we begin? There being none, the Business Operations Committee will consider 3 items on the agenda today. First, we'll hear from the Executive Director's operational update. We'll hear from the Executive Director's operational update, Tess Stovall. Then Tess will discuss the 2024 Commission meeting dates. Finally, the Commission's Director of Finance and Operations, Melanie Harrow, will present budget updates, including the fiscal year 23 budget to actuals, a fiscal 24 budget update, and a fiscal year 2025 budget update, projected budget. Do we have any questions or comments on the agenda before we vote to approve? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it, the agenda is approved. The minutes of the meeting held on March the 23rd, 2023 have been provided. Does anyone have any comments or edits to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed? Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the March 23rd, 2023 meeting?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. The first item on our agenda is an operation update from our Executive Director, Tess Stovall. Tess, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 key updates to review with you all. First, staffing. As we've had a lot of conversations over the last committee meetings, we have had a lot of improvements, I would say, in our staffing over the last several months, both in terms of additional positions that were approved by the General Assembly, as well as working towards hiring additional folks into existing positions. In particular, we are thrilled to have Nate Parker as our Director of School Programs and Supports. Nate and I worked together at the State Board of Education, and then he worked at the Department of Education before coming back to chat back to me at the Commission. We also have Kelly Croneman, who's been with this work since 2018, who's rolling into a part-time role, so more time with her child, but we were able to bring on Katie Bridges, as well as a new federal programs coordinator, Claire, who's going to be joining, who has joined us. Welcome to the team in your first week on the Commission staff, as well as we have, as Melanie shared, a new student data analyst. So we're really excited about where we are in terms of staffing, and to continue to support the work of the Commission. Secondly, in terms of procurement, we do have one interagency agreement that's up for this committee's approval with the Tennessee Language Center. We as a district are responsible for interpretation and translation of our policies and procedures, as well as supporting our schools if they need translation services. So we've had this agreement in existence. We are looking to reestablish this agreement with the Language Center for FY24. And so that is up for this committee's approval and then Commission approval tomorrow. We've also been working through a contractor for our renewal process, which Maggie spoke to earlier. We also have been working on procurement related to Power School support to support Lawrence and our new data analysts around Power School. And with that, that concludes my updates, and we just look for a discussion and motion on the interagency agreement from my update. Thank you.
Thank you, Tess. So we'll wait till tomorrow to look at approving your, we do it now.
I would like the committee to recommend approval now, and then we'll do it at the full commission as well.
Do we have a motion to approve the interagency agreement?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We've got, the motion has been made in the second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Next item on our agenda is the 2024 Commission meeting dates, also presented by Tess. Tess, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have in front of this committee the proposed dates for our 2024 commission meetings. In pulling these dates together, we both looked at our statutory timelines and requirements. We also polled the commissioners to determine that we would have sufficient quorum at all of these meetings. So we are proposing the meetings to have 3 in Nashville as well as 1 outside of Nashville. I think that cadence and schedule is working well so far, and I would recommend that we continue with that. We also have put on these dates 2 special call meetings, depending on our workload of appeals, as well as other timelines. We may need those meetings. Those would be virtual. But if we do not have work for the commission, we would pull those down. Therefore, I am asking this committee to adopt these meeting dates for 2024 and recommend them to the full commission for approval.
Thank you, Tess. Are there any questions or comments about the commission's meeting dates? Do we have a motion to approve the 2024 meeting dates?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The final item on our agenda today is an update on the commission's budget to actuals for fiscal year 2023, as well as a budget update for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 2025. Director of Finance and Operations, Melanie Harwell. Melanie, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Always saving the most exciting news for last with budget updates. So first, I want to talk through the budget to actuals of where we landed for FY23. So you have in your binder expenditures and the budget to actuals as of June 30th. So I do want to note this includes sort of all actuals that we have on our books as of that date. There is still a lengthy close process that the state as a whole goes through. So these are not closed financials by any means. That's why you still see some projections on there around expenses, but we are hopeful everything will be fully closed in time for our October meeting and we can present sort of the final summary at that time. So primarily, we're still waiting for some reimbursement and some authorizer fee revenue to be recorded, as well as some of the expenses that are recorded via journal entries for things like our rent and our technology spaces. So we are still projecting a surplus overall for FY23. We know it is important both to the General Assembly, to us, and to our operators that we are judiciously managing our budget and our expenses. So we are very happy that we have been able to meet sort of all of our reversion goals, or on track to meet all of our reversion goals for the year and even exceed those, and look forward to continuing that for the upcoming year. So are there any questions on budget actuals before I move on? Great. So I will turn to our FY24 amended budget. So we have brought this back up for your consideration and a recommendation for approval. This includes our TISA estimates that are now finalized for the upcoming year. So this current draft budget is based on a conservative enrollment estimate of about 4,700 students across our 13 schools. Again, we feel that is a reasonable, if not conservative number, but we do always want to make sure that we are balancing well within our total revenue, given that we know there is ongoing true-ups and changes with those revenue projections throughout the year, both for enrollment and as districts report more of their revenue information to the state. So this is, we're projecting a surplus of about $835,000 right now. That's about 23% of our total projected revenue, which makes sure that we have plenty of wiggle room to account for any variance throughout the year. So one change that we have made for this year when we look at our budget is that we have moved from including sort of all of our grant pass-through so that this is a little bit of a cleaner picture of our operating budget. And so our intent is not to not update the committee on that pass-through and those dollars, but to instead move that to an update that would come specifically around grants at least twice annually, which also makes a little bit more sense given when final grant information comes in a timeline basis. So you can anticipate a grant update from us in October. Again, we hope that we will have more finalized allocations around our grants at that point, and hopefully this makes it sort of a little bit easier to understand our agency operating budget as a whole. So Tess mentioned some of our contracts and procurement activities. The professional services line item for this year includes the contracts that she referenced in her executive director's update, as well as some room in the budget for supports for our authorizing team and for our federal programs team. We know that there will be a need for additional support there throughout the next year, so we have left some room for that in the budget as well. If there are any questions about the amended FY24 budget, I'm happy to take them. And I do want to acknowledge, I know there was some discussion in a previous meeting around some of the information shared by our panel, which I think was great. So I know there's interest in what our numbers are coming in around TISA funding compared to what we've seen in last year's funding. So happy to provide the whole committee with an update around that at our October meeting, which I think will be helpful for everyone to sort of see what the trends are there across our portfolio.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
on that topic, and I realize that this has been a discussion, and one of the executive directors of one of our schools, based on Alan's question, suggested that there are conversations related to how the economically disadvantaged populations are calculated currently related to SNAP, but student and family transients is a challenge to really capture that, and that her thought was that a better way to capture it is through TennCare enrollment, because it will follow the child, and that way the resources could follow the child. So one, wanted to bring that to you all, and to the extent that we could, with our policy communications with our partners at the department, legislature, whatever, if that is in fact a thoughtful solution, if not that, whatever, but it sounded like a really thoughtful solution. So I don't know where we are on that, and if we can engage in finding that solution to make sure that those intended resources from the legislature actually translate to students in a more accurate way. Sounded like a really thoughtful suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that is a great thing. And we have heard, certainly conversations bubbling up around that, and we've had some preliminary discussions with other partners about that. I think that is something that we can definitely continue to keep in mind. We do know that SNAP TANF data used for direct cert, it's a challenge. It is difficult to identify people. The data is not the easiest to navigate. So I think that's a great long-term conversation for us to have. We are also, with bringing on our new staff member, and Lawrence has done a really excellent job at this, looking to continue to support our schools and making sure that they are identifying their eligible kids, that they're, making sure that when they identify kids, they are getting them into the student information system correctly, to also make sure that there's not, sometimes there are kids that may even be recipients of those benefits and they're slipping through the cracks anyway. So trying to make sure that we're working really closely with our schools on a near-term solution around that and supports around that. But I also think that's a great conversation for us to have.
I don't know if you're done, maybe I should save until the end, but
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
this is probably a very ignorant question, but the surplus, that just reverts back to the state.
So anything that is an allocation from state dollars and that is against that program code would revert back to the state. There is a portion of the authorizer fee, and happy to have an additional conversation, getting a little bit more in the weeds about this, that we are not able to collect every year because of the true-up timelines at the end of the year. So we do also have, as part of that reversion, a portion of that will likely always also be an authorizer fee reversion, which we are required to give back to our schools. So yes, the bulk of our reversion is state funds, but there is also baked into that some acknowledgement that we will also always probably be refunding some authorizer fees as well, given our closed timeline.
Yeah, I think you saw where I was going with my question. I guess not to get too deep in the weeds, but is there a particular percentage or amount that the legislature wants to see, or there's an internal goal set? And I guess long term, how long does that last, or is the goal eventually to minimize that and maybe reduce the authorizer fee?
Yeah, so I think the first question that I typically get, and that I know Tess typically gets, and Hayden typically gets when we walk into a meeting around our budget, is when will you be 100% sustainable on the authorizer fee? It was very much intended for that appropriation to be offsetting us as we expand, and to not be sort of a forever catch-all. Understanding that we also want to maximize the dollars that flow to our school, but it is very clearly the expectation of the General Assembly that we are moving towards 100% sustainability on the authorizer fee. So I do think when we looked at sort of what our effective authorizer fee that we were able to assess last year was, it was actually not a full 3%, it was just under 2% because of the way these true-up timelines work. So we do want to make, we do absolutely want to make sure that we're being judicious in our resources. Certainly whenever we can give an authorizer fee refund, we will absolutely continue to do that. And I do think that as we scale and as we have more authorizer fee revenue, there will likely, or there may be a point in the future where we could look at, how much of that is being sent back to schools, and hopefully have a little bit of scalability there. But I think where we're at for the near term is a very clear expectation that we are, sort of tapping into those funds last, and that we are making good use of our state resources.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So Melanie, let's talk about true-up, because that seems to be, are members of the General Assembly aware that because of the true-up issue, that it's not allowing us to draw down the full authorizer fee we're allowed to draw down, which is keeping us on the state fees longer than we had hoped to be?
So I think like we do meet our reversion target. So I don't want to say that, we're sort of feeling, like we're not reverting a sufficient amount of funds. I think we are moving in the direction which we want to be moving into, which is showing that we are reverting more and more and moving towards a place of sustainability. The authorizer fee is a very, or the true-up process and what we're sort of talking about is a very weedy issue. So I think certainly when we had our budget hearing with Finance and Administration prior to legislative session this year, we got very in the weeds with F&A about this, and looked at some actually some accounting changes that could be made to some of our account codes to support through the General Assembly being able to solve some of the problems around the true-up timeline. But I do think just currently based on the reporting schedule for districts that is in statute, there is not really a great way to avoid that right now, although we are continuing to have conversations with both the state board, with other districts, and with the Department of Education around what tweaks can be made to the process to at least make it sort of as streamlined and efficient as possible. But I do think, we're probably not in a place right now where we would be able to assess the full fee before close, because districts have time to close their books and to report their final revenue, and they need to be afforded that time as well.
So on that, I guess, looking at, Hayden, I just want to make sure that Patsy and Bo especially are fully aware of this, because that's where all of this is going to end up, is in the finance committees of both the House and Senate. I know Chairman White is concerned about this. I know Farrell Hell is, John Lundberg is, but making sure that the finance folks know what's going on, so that we're not getting into a point where somebody's trying to play games down the road with cutting the funding while we're trying to, and again, I'm going to chase a rabbit for a second. Everybody wants us to be self-sufficient, but they don't want us to just approve everything. So again, it's that healthy balance of making sure that we're not approving same for same when we're looking at charter schools. We're actually bringing in high performing, which means we're not going to expand maybe as fast as they had thought we would, because we're looking at that from that standpoint, but also making sure that they understand that we're not able to draw that 3% fully down that's on the books because of all of these issues. So it gets complex, and I know it gets into the weeds. I just want to make sure that the chairs of the finance committees are fully aware of this so that we're protected there.
That's a great flag, and we certainly are looking forward to continuing our conversations with our partners in the legislature. Okay, if there's nothing else on FY '24, I'm gonna quickly talk about our FY '25 initial budget. Believe it or not, we already have to get an initial approval on a budget for FY '25 because, our process with FNA will actually start in September, beginning of September, around getting prepared for our budget, for the next fiscal year. So what we provided here is, our initial revenue and authorizer fee estimates, and this is based on our current estimated TISA rates for FY '24. So we do know that there will likely be changes in enrollment projections, there will likely be changes in revenue assumptions, but we do feel this is the best and most conservative revenue information that we have at this time. So our current proposed budget estimates an enrollment of approximately 5,700 students for next year. Again, knowing that we've got some new schools coming on board and some schools that are continuing to expand, which is exciting. So we have a conservative surplus of 1.2 million projected, which I think is also getting to, we are moving in the direction that people want us to be moving, and we're hopefully approaching a scale point, even though we can't promise anybody about what fiscal year that might land in. And I do want to acknowledge, to your point, as we think about budgeting and making sure that we're internally being judicious with our resources, protecting our authorizing functions is my key goal in managing our budget. So making sure that we are preserving that autonomy, that we would never run into an issue based on approval or denial of something based on our revenue is something that is absolutely at the forefront of sort of our philosophy as we approach the budget. So this is about 30% of total projected revenue, but that is, again, I feel a very conservative estimate of knowing where we'll likely end up for next year. So we also have, as part of this, estimates that are based on our current staffing levels and some static assumptions for most expenses, except for those that would sort of naturally grow with enrollment. So things like the student information system is one. As you add more students, you have to pay for more licenses. But we do know that as we move through this year's appeal cycle, as we engage in our conversations with FNA, we may see a need for additional staffing and a request for additional staffing with the legislature. And so we will keep you all updated on any positions that we hope to request as we look towards FY '25, even though those are not reflected in the budget at this time.
One more quick question, and I want to make sure that when we're looking at these budgets, again, I'm trying to make sure we're not putting handcuffs on the whole committee. Going from 13 schools to 16 schools, is that the 3 we've already approved? So it's not basically saying we have to approve 3 additional ones. Okay, that's my biggest question.
Yeah, my initial, anything that ever comes before the committee in terms of an initial budget is only going to include known information. So that's why we use current year estimates. We don't try to I don't try to consult my crystal ball and see what I think the revenue is going to be. We base it on what we know currently, which is, again, the new schools that have already been approved and what we already know about how much our enrollment is going to grow or projected to grow.
And I asked that question knowing the answer, but I wanted to get it on the record because I want people to know we are not under pressure to approve any school that is in the pipeline or anything else. That's why I asked the question the way I did. We have the ability to look at this from the de novo approach, from the beginning, going off of our staff, going off the executive director's recommendation, all of the supporting documentation. I just want to make sure that everyone knows we're not tying the full commission's hands, that we have to add X amount of schools to meet our budget. So that's why I wanted to make that clear.
Good point.
Any other questions? Melanie, anything else?
Nope, thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you again, Melanie, for keeping us updated on the commission's finances. Are there any additional questions from the commissioners?
And I do think we will need a motion to approve the FY '24 and FY '25.
We're going there next.
Yes.
Okay, just asking if there's any questions first. There being no questions, do I have a motion to approve the revised 24 and proposed 25 budget?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, no. The ayes have it, the budgets are approved. Thank you all for attendance and participation in the meeting of the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. At this time, I'd like to ask if there are any final comments. There being none, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Oh, so
so
moved.
moved.
Sorry, apologies, Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry.
No, we want to stay.
Slow your roll, sister, slow your roll. Is there a second? We got a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No, sorry. Let's get out of
Meeting's
here.
adjourned.
The ayes have it. The next meeting of the Business Operations Committee, slow your roll, Eddie. The Business Operations Committee is scheduled for September 21st, 2023.
He's a good guy.
I look forward to seeing you at the full commission meeting tomorrow morning. We stand adjourned.